I always hated space. The infinite black, speckled with distant stars that taunted you with unreachable possibilities. Even when we learned how to zip to and fro, the emptiness clawed at me. Turns out, nothing makes you appreciate Earth's green hills and blue skies like the sight of endless, yawning void. Guess that shouldn't have been a surprise. You don't know what you've got till it's, well, light years away. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who felt that way. For a whole other species, the Kelvari, it was something akin to religion. A sacred bond between them and the worlds that fostered life. Didn't mean they were all that nice, mind you. Kelvari were prickly about sharing even a rock with other sentient beings. Fought like hornets over half-baked asteroids. If they'd been confined to their corner of the galaxy, I wouldn't have cared less. The problem was the Relentless. No one even knows why those armored jerks started their crusade. They'd pop out of hyperspace near any system with a whiff of life, blast everything that moved to cinders, then vanish. No demands, no chance for surrender. They weren't picky, wiped out colonies, outposts, anything with a heartbeat and a brainwave. No strategy to it, no sense. It was like watching a wildfire. It didn't care about the trees or the grass, just burned till there was nothing but ash. That put the Kelvari in a bind. Their holy crusade thing, much as it grated on me, meant they couldn't just hunker down and wait for the wildfire to blow over. They had to fight. Only, the Relentless were an ugly match. Faster ships, harder hitting weapons, and that relentless, unstoppable drive. The Kelvari could sting, sure, but it was like a swarm of bees against a bear. Brave, maybe even a bit effective, but the bear was gonna smash that hive. That's where folks like me came in. Not that I enlisted or anything heroic like that. I was a pilot, or more accurately, a cargo hauler with a beat-up ship, a pile of debt, and itchy feet. Seemed to me that the best way to survive a galaxy-sized brawl was to keep far, far away from it. Worked for a while, too. Turns out, even the desperate pay well when your choices are get paid or get vaporized. So, I started running supplies for the Kelvari. Fuel, meds, food, all the exciting stuff. And hey, beats dodging slavers in backwater systems. I can still remember the first time I saw a real, live battle. It was like nothing I'd ever seen simulated in the academy. Kelvari ships, those big manta ray looking things, swarmed around a Relentless cruiser. Spits of green laser fire against shimmering shields that rippled like water reflecting an explosion. Even from a distance, you could feel the fury of it. The cruiser was outnumbered, cornered, but it wasn't going down without a fight. A lucky shot clipped a Kelvari fuel carrier, it just blew apart, no pretty explosion, just a flash and then the wreckage spinning off into oblivion. That should have put the fear of God in me. Should have sent me tail tucked straight back to the nearest human sector. But I had this itch. Like I needed to be closer. Like a moth to a flame, stupid and self-destructive. I convinced myself, it wasn't very hard at that point, to be honest, that maybe there was something I could do to help. A little edge, a trick those stiff, by the book Kelvari wouldn't have thought of. Here's the thing about being a human, we're adaptable. We're scavengers, scroungers, the ultimate survivors. You throw us out of an airlock, we'll figure out a way to breathe space. Turns out, that kind of crazy was the Kelvari's last-ditch hope. They started taking us on, advisors they called us. Which really meant throwing us into the fire to see what happened. Most of us didn't last more than one engagement. That itch? Yeah, it got a lot of folks vaporized. I was lucky, I guess. Or maybe just particularly tenacious. The Kelvari battle tactics were like watching a chess game with half the pieces missing and the ones left moving according to rules invented on the spot. Everything neat, compartmentalized, so damn elegant on paper. They didn't do well with variables. Chaos. Humans. We live and breathe chaos. We weren't big on plans, especially the kind that went all right team, at precisely. That kind of stuff might work with obedient drones, not a bunch of mismatched pilots who were either desperate, a bit crazy, or usually both. But we did have one thing none of the other species seemed to get, instinct. We'd cobble together groups on the fly, trading frequencies, learning to move in sync like a flock of birds, not a battle squadron. Sure, some of it was luck. Some of it was dumb, desperate moves that somehow, against all odds, paid off. It started with a couple of small victories. Not pretty ones, either. A feint to cover a civilian evacuation, a suicidal charge against a Relentless patrol with every kind of ammo we could scrounge. Turns out, the enemy didn't like it when you refused to act the way you were supposed to. Turns out, the Kelvari, when they were fighting to survive and not to uphold some principle, could be almost as crazy as us. A few victories led to a few more. We were buying them time, I guess. A breathing space. And in that space, something started to shift. The Kelvari, so long used to losing with a kind of resigned dignity, started remembering how to hope. They saw that you didn't need neat formations and elaborate plans to fight. Sometimes you just had to throw every damn thing you had against the wall and see what stuck. That change of heart, that's when the tide really started to turn. Suddenly, those crazy human tactics weren't just a desperation move, they were something you integrated, perfected. Every human pilot became a little unpredictable knot at the heart of a Kelvari squadron. Every Kelvari fleet had its share of human advisors barking crazy orders they'd never have thought of before. And the Relentless, who'd swept aside every species they'd encountered in that relentless push. They started faltering. They'd perfected the art of crushing resistance. What the hell do you do when there's no resistance to crush? No central command to break, no line to hold. Just a swarm of angry hornets that sting from a dozen different angles, then regroup, then come right back at you until you can't even swat anymore. It wasn't pretty, this shift. Battles got messier, bloodier, with even higher casualties on both sides. The kind you didn't talk about after, the kind that gave you nightmares long after the adrenaline stopped flowing. But it was working. We were pushing the Relentless back, not in some sweeping victory, but system by system, asteroid by asteroid. They were relentless, but we, it turned out, were stubborn. They had the bigger hammer, but we had learned to make every nail a fight. The war bled on for a long time after that, the Relentless clawing and thrashing like a wounded animal. It was brutal and ugly, and none of us, human or Kelvari, came out of it the same. But eventually, it came down to a single, burned-out system and the last of their fleet trapped in orbit. I remember, I was attached to a Kelvari cruiser on comms, listening to the whole galaxy hold its breath. The demand went out, surrender or be obliterated. That's what wars always come down to, I suppose. There was a long silence. I swear, it stretched out for minutes, my heart thundering against my ribs so loud I could barely hear the blip of comm traffic. Then, a crackling reply, weak, barely audible against the static. Not defiance, though. Just a question, almost as tired as the war itself. Why? I don't know who it was on the other end. A commander, pilot, someone clinging to a broken comm unit in the wreckage of the final Relentless ship. I also don't know what answer the Kelvari gave them, if any. The truth is, I don't think there was a good answer. Wars start over stupid reasons, then go on over bloody pride. They end when one side breaks. That's all. There was no big, heroic battle that day. No surrender ceremony, no speeches for the history channels. Just the flickering out of the last Relentless signature in the vast sweep of space. A kind of silence I'd never heard before. Then the rebuilding started. That was almost harder than the fighting. Worlds torn apart, species on the brink, it turns out that ending a war is just the start of another, longer fight. And in the middle of it all, there was always the question, what next? Us humans, we'd never wanted to be warriors. Kelvari, broken and humbled, were rethinking their whole crusade. Even the endless black didn't seem so empty anymore. Maybe because peace is an odd thing. Not nearly as exciting or satisfying as anyone would have you believe. I used to dream of it during those long runs through blockaded sectors. A safe harbor, a mug of something strong, and a bunk that didn't shake itself apart mid-flight. Turns out, the safe harbor bit is overrated. The something strong makes your head hurt in the morning, and as for the bunk, well, you don't sleep quite so soundly on solid ground when you're used to a comforting hum of engines. The galaxy was a colossal mess. The Relentless might have been the loudest bully, but they weren't the only ones taking swings. In the chaos, all those old grudges, those territorial squabbles, those long simmering hatreds flared to life. And suddenly everyone wanted humanity's help again. Not for supplies this time. For tactics, for strategies, for that messy, unpredictable brand of fighting only we seemed to do well. Thing is, I wasn't sure if I wanted to give it to them. Seemed a surefire way to make this galaxy-sized brawl even worse. But when you watch a colony burn, when you fish escape pods out of wreckage, filled with families who look just like the ones on posters fading back on Earth, it's hard to turn away. Then, there was the question of the Kelvari. We'd fought alongside them for so long, they'd changed. The rigid certainty, the sense of sacred purpose, had crumbled a long while back, ground away by the hard realities of attrition war. What was left was something raw and scarred, but closer to us than I ever imagined possible. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance not just for peace, but for something new to bloom in its wake. Turns out, that messy fight for survival forged a bond stronger than any political treaty. Us flyboys and those prickly Kelvari commanders started working together on projects nobody could have imagined before the war. Joint patrols, shared early warning outposts in the dead zones. It was awkward, a lot of hand gestures and misunderstandings that could have sparked a diplomatic incident, but we made it work. The first time a human pilot helped defend a Kelvari nursery world. Well, that was a turning point, I think. Wasn't enough, though. It's one thing to help put out fires, another thing entirely to stop them from starting in the first place. But when your entire life has been about war, about the grand struggle for survival, it's damn hard to imagine any other way. That's where things got interesting. Or, some might say, where I stepped right into a nest of vipers. The Kelvari had this. Not a council, exactly. More like a gathering of their oldest and their wisest. They called them the Keepers. Figured they must have been historians or scholars, folks who kept the flame of their traditions alive. Turns out, I was wrong. Way wrong. The first time they called me in, I almost expected a medal or something foolish like that. Instead, I got ushered into a dim, cavernous chamber that could have passed for a cathedral if it weren't so dusty. Robed figures peered at me from the shadows, their voices a low hum that made my teeth itch. Talk about intimidating. Turns out, these keepers were less about the past and more about the future. For all their clinging to tradition, the Kelvari had a few pragmatists hiding in their midst. They'd seen how the galaxy was spiraling toward chaos, and they wanted their people to be more than just the best at fighting a losing battle. They wanted to be part of the solution. And they thought they'd found their ace in the hole, me. Turns out, even the most hidebound council of elders recognized there was a pattern to the human madness. They knew I wasn't just some hotshot pilot with dumb luck and a reckless streak. I could see the pieces of the galactic puzzle clicking together in a way they couldn't. Alliances, trade routes, the simmering resentments beneath the polite treaties signed by species who hated each other's guts. Their proposal was, well, audacious. They wanted me to be a kind of ambassador, a middle ground where everyone could meet. Not to hash out peace deals or sign fancy documents with feathers and seals. Nope. It was simpler and far more risky. They wanted me to start a fight club. Now, I'd been in more barb rolls between sectors than I care to remember, but this was different. They envisioned a place somewhere neutral, on one of those abandoned orbital stations nobody squabbled over. Representatives from feuding species, and let me tell you, the galaxy wasn't short on feuds, locked in controlled combat. They figured, let them get the aggression out of their system, beat each other senseless in a contained arena, and maybe, just maybe, they'd be more willing to actually talk afterward. A sublimation of violence, some fancy pants keeper called it. I called it bat crap crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw a flicker of something that might just work. Humans, for all our faults, were damn good at sniffing out the root of conflict. We got under each other's skin better than anyone, which also meant we saw the fault lines, the places where the fighting went beyond politics and into something more primal, more visceral. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was the thing you had to address first. Not with words, but with fists, lasers, or whatever passed for weapons in your corner of the galaxy. So I did it. I took on the most ridiculous, backward, potentially explosive job in galactic history. The Kelvari pumped resources into retrofitting that derelict station, turning half of it into a series of arenas that would make a gladiator weep. The other half we crammed with meeting rooms and the most extensive translation software this side of the Milky Way. I handpicked a crew, humans, Kelvari, and a few other species crazy enough to buy into the plan. And then, I sent out the invitations. You want to talk about tents? That first summit, I felt like I was juggling live grenades with the pins half out. There were species in that station who'd been slaughtering each other for centuries, the hate so thick in the air you could choke on it. My job was to keep them from killing each other on the spot and somehow convince them to face off in the arena instead of across some blasted out planet. The first fights were brutal. Not in a flashy way. There was this raw, desperate quality to them, like it wasn't about winning, but about clawing back some fraction of the pain, the fear, and the loss they'd piled onto each other over generations. I learned a lot those days, about hate, about grief that gets twisted up into needing to cause more of it. And sometimes, and this was the thing that kept me going, sometimes I saw that twist loosen just a little. An honorable fight, one with a clear beginning and an end, could drain poison that no negotiation could touch. I'd see them afterward, battered, broken, but the frantic edge in their eyes replaced with something more akin to exhaustion. Then the translators would get to work, and those pilots, those leaders, those warriors so steeped in hate they could barely breathe, they'd start to talk. Not about concessions, not about borders, but about why. Why they couldn't let it go, why even now, even after seeing their opponent bleed, they still held onto that need for vengeance. It was slow. I lost count of how many times I thought it was hopeless, how many times I figured one good brawl would break the whole damn station apart. But somehow, we limped on. I got good at patching up wounds, at talking down folks about to explode, and at convincing them to step back into the arena when every instinct told them otherwise. It was like running a hospital, a madhouse, and a diplomatic summit all at once, with a dash of saloon chaos for spice. Turns out, the galaxy was hungrier for a way out of the spiral of violence than I'd expected. One tentative ceasefire led to another. Grudges eased, old wounds started to scar. My crazy fight club went from a diplomatic joke to a whispered solution, and finally, to a grudgingly accepted necessity. Did it end all the wars? Hell no. The galaxy's a big place, and there's always those who enjoy the chaos, who profit from it. But it lit a beacon, I think. A way station in the black, where you could throw down instead of blowing up, and where words, however tentative, had a chance to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start tipping the scales back towards something like sanity. Turns out, I wasn't just running a galactic brawlers club and playing amateur peacemaker. The keepers, with their dusty robes and quiet voices, had their own game simmering beneath the surface. I'd felt it from the start, a kind of expectant hum in the air when we talked about the future. Figured it was all those high-minded ideals the Kelvari were always on about, something about shaping a better galaxy. But as my fight club, or the arena of understanding as some stuffed shirt diplomat named it, became the unlikely heart of galactic diplomacy, their focus got sharper, more intense. Then came the summons that didn't involve patching up brawling delegates. This time, the chamber of the keepers was heavy with a different kind of tension. They laid it out with that bluntness that Kelvari sometimes mask as courtesy. The old ways, the sacred duty to protect those blooming worlds, that was over. They were a battered shield, barely holding on. But in the fires of that war, in the crucible of alliance with humans, they'd seen something new. A chance not just to survive, but to shape the galaxy in a way no single species ever could. That shaping, it turned out, was what I'd been doing without even realizing it. Building something stronger than alliances or trade routes. In the arenas, where sworn enemies faced each other not as armies but as individuals, something had started to shift. Trust. Grudging at first, born of sweat and pain and the primal understanding of a warrior recognizing another, regardless of how many legs or eyes or tentacles they had. My fight club was unwittingly forging the backbone of the first true galactic union. They wanted me at the head of it. Not in some stuffy council, but the way humans do things, leading by being in the thick of it. Me, with my ramshackle ship and less than stellar reputation. Apparently, they got a kick out of the irony. It was more power, more responsibility than I'd ever wanted. It also felt like the weight of a whole damn universe pressing down, ready to crush me if I chose wrong. Choosing wrong. Seemed like I'd been doing a lot of that lately. The galaxy's grand peace plan was teetering on a knife's edge, and I was the one holding the hilt. I started dreaming of stars going cold, of planets cracking like eggshells under an unseen fist. Responsibility, it seemed, wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The Kelvari, surprisingly, got it. They had some ancient tradition about the burdens of leadership, the lonely path of the ones meant to shoulder the stars. Turned out, we could talk about that, in halting words and with a lot of hand gestures over half-empty glasses at the station bar. They didn't make the burdens lighter, but they were there. Turns out, the best allies don't fix your problems, just help you keep going when you're sure you're about to break. One particularly rough night, after yet another summit that teetered between success and a system-wide bloodbath, I found myself on the station's observation deck. The view was lousy, just a smear of stars, the kind that makes you feel both insignificant and like a giant walking target. Old habit, I guess, sizing up potential threats and escape routes. Except, something was off. A flicker out there, faint, but growing brighter. Humans have eyes evolved for spotting movement, and something deep in my lizard brain said that flicker wasn't any ship I knew. There was a wrongness to it, a ripple in the fabric of the cosmos that made my skin crawl. I sent out the alert, the highest priority, the kind that sends entire fleets scrambling. Because fear is a funny thing. It can make you run, or it can make you dig in and fight. That night, on that lonely station with all my dreams of galactic peace hanging in the balance, I felt a surge of that primal, desperate energy. It wasn't directed at any of the squabbling species below. This was something new, something vast, and something hungry. The response wasn't what I expected. No questions, no frantic demands for more intel. Just a calm, clear message from the highest-ranking Kelvari commander, old scars tight across his face. "We stand ready," it said. That was all. There was no big, heroic battle. No last-minute stand that would go down in history blasts. What followed was weeks of tension, the entire galaxy holding its breath, fleets realigning, the arenas emptying as sworn enemies quietly returned to their systems. We had built something fragile, a web of trust and communication stretching across the stars. And we were about to find out just how strong it was. When they came, it wasn't with warships or declarations of conquest. It was a coldness seeping through the void. Ships winked out, communications went dead in expanding spheres of silence. Planets flickered and vanished from sensor displays without a trace. We were getting warnings from panicked outposts, and glimpses of things on the edge of our instrument's reach. Massive, unknowable shapes that stretched the laws of physics as if they were old rubber bands about to snap. The Relentless were child's play compared to this. Turns out, we'd spent so long squabbling with each other, we'd forgotten that the universe itself was a dangerous place. Whatever this was, it wasn't about conquest or territory. It was something impersonal, immense, with an appetite that made the galactic empires look like mayflies. Now, here's the twist, the kind that sends chills down your spine even when the universe is literally trying to swallow you whole. In the face of this entity, this ancient predator woken in the black, the galaxy didn't fracture. There were no last-ditch pleas for mercy, no desperate bids for self-preservation. Every system, every species, human, Kelvari, the lot of us, turned to face the void together. Turns out, unity isn't forged in peace treaties. It's born in the shared will to survive against an enemy that makes all your old squabbles look like a playground brawl. My crazy fight club, meant to sublimate violence, was about to see the most epic battleground ever imagined. We learned more about fear in those following months than in a lifetime dodging slavers and asteroid storms. It was a different kind of fear, though. The kind that sits heavy at the back of your throat, not making you want to run, but to dig in, find one last spark of defiance in the face of the inevitable. And here's what I learned along the way: when facing the end of entire worlds, it's the little things that hit the hardest. The final broadcast from a science station filled with laughter just hours before they went dark. The sight of a Kelvari nursery fleet, their ships bristling with weapons, evacuating the wide-eyed young instead of heading into battle. The silence echoing through the arenas in my station, the dust settling on abandoned trophies won and grudging respect earned. But we didn't go quietly into that encroaching darkness. Every species poured whatever they had, whatever edge they'd ever held secret, into the communal fight. The Kelvari, with their centuries of battle knowledge, became the backbone of the defense strategy, their once ceremonial formations taking on a terrifyingly effective edge. Humans. Well, we scrambled, scrounged, and found those desperate solutions we're so good at. Old freighters were packed with explosives and sent hurtling like fireballs towards the shifting shadows. Forgotten weapons depots were dusted off, their ancient tech jury rigged to hit with more power than anyone thought possible. The outpouring of raw ingenuity was breathtaking. It was like everyone had always held back a little, a kernel of defiance tucked away. Now, with nothing left to lose, it burst like a supernova. We turned peaceful research stations into particle cannons, repurposed asteroid mining rigs into kinetic bombardment platforms. Every beat-up ship, every pilot with an ounce of fight left, joined the swarm. It wasn't elegant, but it had a terrible, relentless beauty to it. Like a cornered animal baring its teeth, the galaxy roared. We won a few victories. Small ones. Managed to slow the encroaching darkness in some sectors, by a measure of time, a flicker of hope. Each time those impossible things moved, shifted their tactics in response to our own, it sent a thrill of something like triumph through the fleet calms. We were forcing this cosmic predator to acknowledge us, to adapt. For a moment, it almost felt like we might win. And then came the hammer blow. A tendril of that impossible cold, faster than anything we'd seen before, pierced straight into the heart of a major Kelvari system. Not their fleets, not the fortified shipyards. It went straight for the place they'd guarded most ferociously throughout centuries of war, one of their oldest world seeds. A place teeming with fragile new life, the hope of their species woven into the very soil. We saw it happen in agonizing real time. The sensor feeds stuttered, images turning grainy as if the universe itself couldn't bear to watch the unfolding horror. And as those ancient trees and delicate blossoming lifeforms withered and turned to something like black glass, a wave of despair swept the calm's channels unlike any I'd ever felt. It was more than loss, more than defeat. It was the shattering of something fundamental, some deep-rooted belief of the Kelvari, that against all odds, life would endure. That despair hit us all, a psychic blow that staggered even the humans with our knack for stubborn survival. But through it, something else emerged. Cold rage. We'd faced conquerors before, even those who cared little for life. This was an affront to something deeper than survival. It was an attack on the very essence of what every species in the galaxy had been fighting for, some unspoken belief in a future that was worth clawing back from the brink. We regrouped with a kind of grim resolve I'd never thought possible. It wasn't hope anymore, not precisely. It was more like retribution with a cosmic twist. My station became the epicenter of this rage. The arenas, where we'd coaxed understanding and grudging trust from conflict, were now a flurry of calculations, desperate strategy sessions. Humans and Kelvari hunched over displays, their faces tight, sharing weapons schematics and battle plans we'd all sworn never to use. Every brawler, every pilot who'd ever stepped foot in my arenas, was recalled. Not to break up bar fights this time, but to join the most desperate battle the galaxy had ever seen. We were going to force that colossal shadow to see the cost of its hunger, make it choke on the echoes of those shattered worlds. We were going to make a pyre of our own broken ships and dying stars, and in that fire, maybe, just maybe, we'd forge a weapon to turn the tide. But forging takes time, and that was the one thing in desperately short supply. Each transmission brought news of systems winking out. The noose of darkness was tightening, and our desperate gambit was a sliver of possibility against a vast, unknowable force. It seemed the galaxy's unlikely union would have its final stand not with speeches and salutes, but with guns blazing and a defiant roar echoing into the uncaring void. The question hanging heavy in the stale air of my station was this: would it be enough?